Welcome to this recording. This will provide a brief overview of the Iowa Science Standards. This brief overview is in no way meant to replace any of the workshops that you may be attending through your local AEA offices. Instead, this is simply a 1-hour overview to maybe bring you back up to speed, refamiliarize yourself with the new Iowa Science Standards, or help prepare you for any coursework for which you are going to be partaking in. Let me share my screen for the PowerPoint. And if you would like, this is the bit.ly link, so you are welcome to go ahead and get that open on a second monitor if you have one, or make a note of it so that you can re-access these slides again at a later time if you so choose. Just a reminder that these links are case sensitive, so you will want to make sure that you're using a capital I and a capital A for Iowa, the capital S in science, or just Sci, the capital S for our standards abbreviation, and the capital O for overview. That link will be available on the bottom of the slides as we go through, so if you did not get a chance to write it down and you want it later in the PowerPoint, you will be able to find it. Just a real quick brief introduction of myself. My name is Mandy Sanerman. I work for AEA 267. I am housed out of the Cedar Falls office. My colleague is Kay Schmallen. She is also a science consultant, and she is housed out of the Clear Lake office. Either one of us would be able to assist you with any of your science questions. Kay also has additional responsibilities in technology and TAG, and I also have additional responsibilities in AIW and STEM. Our overview today is going to be centered around the background on the science standards in Iowa. We will take a look at three-dimensional learning. We'll take a closer look at each of the standards and then discuss the implementation plan for Iowa. Something that Kay and I hear frequently when we're talking about the new science standards is we hear from teachers and administrators, we just got new science standards. I don't know why we're getting new ones again. So we wanted to clarify a little bit about where Iowa Core came from. Iowa Core was enacted in 2008 for Iowa, but really those standards came from a booklet written in 1996. And that book outlined state standards, or national standards in that case. However, that book itself was based on another document, Benchmarks for Science Literacy. This book was written in 1993, and some of you may remember that. Some of you may still even have it on your bookshelves. I know I have it sitting on mine. So our 2008 Iowa Core Standards were actually developed from a 1993 document. Just to put that in reference for you, in 1993, we were using floppy disks to store our data, and those disks had a storage capacity of 1.44 megabytes. So we've come a long way since 1993, but yet that's where our Iowa Core Standards were based. By contrast, the new Iowa Science Standards were developed in 2015, but they were based on the Next Generation Science Standards, which were developed in 2013. The book that was developed from was the Framework for K-12 Science Education. That came out in final draft form in 2011. And again, just for our frame of reference, in 2011, our technology had us utilizing flash drives with a capacity of 16 gig. So hopefully by taking a look at that, you'll understand while it feels like we just got new standards, those standards really were outdated because they were based on a document written in 1993. A lot has changed since then. We know more about how students learn. We know more about what they should be learning in science. And the science itself has changed from 1993. So these Iowa Science Standards take into account the change in content and the change in our students. So what the millennial students are like and how they learn best. The book that I discussed, the Framework for K-12 Science Education, which was the foundation document for the Next Generation Science Standards, that book was written. It had a committee of 18 individuals and 4 different design teams that worked on it. A public draft was released in July of 2010, and then based on information, the framework was then released in July of 2011. This book identifies the science that all students in K-12 should know. So it covers the cross-cutting concepts idea, the practices idea, and then the content itself and what students should know as they go forth in their science education. And this is information that students should know for college readiness, career readiness, and just to be a citizen for the United States. The book is available as a free download. So if you take a look at this bit.ly link, again, it's case sensitive, so make sure that you're writing down the capital letters. That will take you to a site where you can either purchase the book if you like the hard copy, or you can download a free PDF of that book and then keep it on your laptop, your tablet, whatever form of technology you like. It would also most likely be possible, depending on your AEA, to download that file and ask that your local education agency print that and then spiral bind it for you if you do want a paper copy but don't want to pay the $40 for the actual print book. So K-12 Science Framework, so K-12 Sci Framework is the bit.ly link. Feel free to write that down or make reference to it in the future. We have a very quick video for you that just explains the background and why we are looking at this transition for next generation science standards. Hopefully that video has you a little bit excited. I'm sure you're also apprehensive, maybe nervous about the new science standards, but to hear from some of the writers, some of the teachers who are implementing the science standards, hopefully you've developed that sense of excitement for what these new standards will mean for your students in your classroom. One of the cornerstones of our new science standards in Iowa, or the next generation science standards, would be three-dimensional learning. This is frequently a new term to teachers who have not been familiar with the next generation science standards. So I have a quick activity for you to apply what three-dimensional learning might look like, but instead of in a science classroom, it's something that we're a little bit more familiar with. So we're going to take a look at a recipe. And this happens to be a recipe that I found on the internet, so feel free if you want to make this tonight for supper. You certainly will be able to search for it and be able to find it. A roasted garlic souffle. As we look at this recipe, I'll put it up on your screen. The first thing I want you to do is just skim through the recipe. So I'll give you a few seconds on the first page, then I'll scroll to the second. So just skim through and get yourself familiar with the recipe. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. We are now going to skim through this recipe, and we'll use three different lenses, so to speak, for the way that we look at this recipe. And we'll look at it through each of the three dimensions of three-dimensional learning. The first dimension are practices. So as we look through this recipe, we want to be looking for the practices of cooking, the doing things. We can consider if I were to give this recipe to someone who maybe has not cooked, they are not familiar with much to do in the kitchen. So maybe you can want to consider your spouse, maybe you want to consider one of your children. But think of this, if you had handed this recipe to somebody who is inexperienced with cooking in general, what are some of the doing things, some of the practices that they might need your support with? Or you maybe would have had to pre-taught them how to do these things. So as we look through, we may have individuals who don't know what it means to trim, so how to trim something. We may have individuals who aren't familiar with what it means to drizzle something, or steep, or how to butter a dish. You know, typically butter would be a noun. Here we're using it as a verb. We may not have individuals that understand what it is to beat something or what whisking looks like. Another practice would be folding. We may have individuals who don't know how to fold something in comparing to a stirring or a whisking. So as we looked at this first, we identified practices, doing things. There are far more in here than just the ones that I highlighted. But we do want to make sure that we're able to get you through this overview in a relatively easy amount of time, so we won't have time to go through everything in it. So as we looked and found those few practices, we now want to switch our lens to content, which is the second of the three dimensions. The content piece of this recipe would be ideas or words, vocabulary that we may have someone in the kitchen saying, I don't even know what that means. So again, as we skim through this, we may have individuals that don't know what a head of garlic is compared to a clove of garlic. We may have individuals that don't understand what these ingredients are. So when we're looking at thyme sprigs or bay leaves, We may have individuals that have no idea what a gratin dish might look like. We may have people trying this recipe that don't know what a roux should look like. I will apologize in advance for my poor French. We may have people who don't know what bechamel is. And again, if I said that wrong, feel free to correct me. We may have individuals that don't know what Gruyere is. We may have individuals that aren't even familiar with the term souffle. So those are the content pieces. First, the practices, the doing of the recipe. Now we've looked at the content, the terms that an individual may not know what that word means. And the third dimension are the areas of this recipe that are cross-cutting, meaning it really doesn't matter if I'm dealing with this recipe or if I'm dealing with any other recipe, a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner. It's an idea, a content, or a skill, or a practice that really would benefit me throughout all cooking in general. So ideas such as preheating an oven, that's something that, depending on how you're cooking, this is going to be more familiar to individuals with any recipe that they might be going through. Measurement is another one. You know, what do 2.5 cups look like? What is a cup measurement? What's a tablespoon versus what is a teaspoon? How would we separate eggs? Depending on how you cook, that may or may not be a skill that would be utilized frequently. How do we grate items? So in this recipe, those are the 3 cross-cutting areas: the practices, the doing, the content, the things that we would need to know, and the cross-cutting concepts, those ideas or themes that really would carry across to all types of cooking, not just this gourmet recipe, but any recipe or the vast majority of recipes. So as we looked at that activity, we identified the 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards: practices, content, and cross-cutting concepts. Those 3 all work together. There is not one that's more important than the other. I'm going to break these down for you, and we will look at each of them individually. The first would be the practices. There are 8 identified science practices. These are the doing of science. Frequently, when I ask science teachers, what do you want from your students by the end of this year? We hear things like, I want them to be able to reason critically. I want them to be able to problem solve. I want them to be able to think. I want them to be able to analyze information that they're hearing. I don't typically hear, I want students to be able to balance equations. I want them to name all the bones in the human body. Instead, what we want from our students are these science practices. So these are the areas that we most feel as educators can benefit a student in the real world. Next Generation Science Standards and Iowa Science Standards agree with that thought and incorporate it as 1/3 of our standards. So there are 8 practices that are identified. Asking questions and defining problems. Asking questions focuses on the science track, where defining problems focuses more on engineering. Being able to develop and use models, planning and carrying out investigations, analyzing and interpreting data, using math and computational thinking, constructing explanations, again, that's in the science realm, and designing solutions would be in engineering, engaging in an argument from science, and obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. So these are the 8 doing, the 8 ideas of how we practice science. A progression is available from Next Generation Science Standards. We've put this in a Google document, so feel free. You can make a copy of this and change it in any way that you like, but it identifies each of the practices and then shows you what that practice would look like in K2, 3-5, 6-8, 9-12. As teachers look at that, typically if they are just starting out in the new standards, they might find their students are performing a grade band below where they would be expected to be performing. Again, Nobody expects the students to get here right away. This will be a progression. But over time, the 9-12 teachers would now have an understanding of what the 6-8 students are coming into them with. The same is true for the 6-8 teachers would have an understanding of what the 3-5 students will be coming to them with, all the way down to K2. So this gives you an idea of what the students coming to you are like in terms of their science skills and what you would like to be preparing them for as they leave your grade band to move up to the next one. And each of the practices are identified with examples of what the students will be able to do at those grade levels. As we go back to our PowerPoint, with these practices, we need to understand that our science standards will identify one practice per standard. But that doesn't mean just because that's an identified practice that it's the only practice that we would be focusing on. A lot of these practices are connected to one another. For example, it would be relatively difficult to utilize math and computational thinking without then analyzing and interpreting that data. So simply because these are 8 separate bullet points doesn't mean that we would only discuss one at a time. We may have a focus with our students of one particular practice for an investigation, but the other practices would also be incorporated in that investigation. Here we have a sample lesson from a 5th grade classroom talking about how they are utilizing the practices. As you watch this video, think about what are some of the science practices that you might be seeing in this video. So as we think about the science and engineering practices, those 8 practices that were identified, we can see a multitude of them in this video. We had students that were asking questions and defining problems. You heard the teacher say at the very beginning, they were discussing what things float, what things are buoyant. You had a young gentleman talking about aerodynamics. So the kids were doing that practice of asking questions and defining problems. We also obviously were developing and using models. You saw those models. We had zip lines. We had the tube-like thing, as the girl described it. We had a variety of different types of boats that you could see. These students planned and carried out their own investigations. Every G.I. Joe was getting across the baby pool in a different way, so it was not a recipe, if you will, of students all doing the exact same thing. These students had to analyze and interpret the data that they were seeing. While it wasn't explicit in the video, you heard them calling out a time. So perhaps the students were then going to take the next step of how could I make this go faster? Or if I wasn't successful, how could I be successful? These students were designing solutions for the problem. So trying to get that G.I. Joe across the baby pool in the most efficient way. They had to obtain, evaluate, and communicate information. You heard the one young lady talking about the fact that they wrote a paper prior to this. So we had a multitude of practices found within this video. It is very likely that they were focusing on just one, perhaps when they started the unit, but through this culminating activity, we were able to see a lot of those practices coming through. So the first dimension of practices we just covered. We are going to move on to the cross-cutting concepts. These are ideas that will carry across regardless of what domain of science we might be in. There are 7 cross-cutting concepts, and they include patterns, cause and effect, scale, proportion, and quantity, systems and system models, energy and matter, focusing on flows, cycles, and conservation, structure and function, and stability and change. What makes these ideas nice is not only do they connect across all areas of science, so it doesn't matter if we're talking biology or physical science or earth science or space science. These ideas will carry through no matter what the science domain is. However, these can also carry through to other curricular areas. Think for a moment, where do you see patterns? Aside from a science classroom, what other activities or what other curricular areas might discuss patterns? We can look at patterns in mathematics. We can look at patterns in literacy. If we're thinking of cause and effect, we might just be discussing cause and effect in a social studies classroom, or again, in writing. So these ideas can carry through to other curricular areas. It wasn't actually the way they were designed, but it certainly lends itself to that. The cross-cutting concepts were designed to connect all the domains of science. However, we can use them as a connective tissue to help our students synthesize outside of just science, to help them make sense of what they're doing in math and literacy and social studies does have a place in amongst their science curriculum as well. When we look at the progression of cross-cutting concepts, it can help us understand a little bit more about what students can be looking at and discussing. For example, if I look at scale, proportion, and quantity, when I first think about that, my mind does not take me to what kindergartners would be able to do in this area. I was primarily a middle school and high school teacher. But when I look at what K to second grade students would be doing in this area, we're talking about relative scales, bigger and smaller, hotter, colder, faster, slower. That is the K2 grade band version of scale, proportion, and quantity. This document will take all 7 cross-cutting concepts and break them down so that you're able to see those and how they would progress, again, from kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade. That is available, again, through a bit.ly link. So your bit.ly with the dot between the T and the L, and then your /7 cross-cutting is the URL for that. Again, the C must be capitalized. These are case sensitive. We've covered the practices, the doing of science, those 8 ideas, asking questions, defining the problem, designing solutions. We've covered the cross-cutting concepts, the 7 ideas or themes that go across all science domains and can extend into other curricular areas. And then the third component is content. Next Generation Science Standards and the Iowa Science Standards have selected what they consider to be 4 domains: physical science, and for maybe teachers with an elementary background, physical science includes chemistry and physics, life science, earth and space science, and then this 4th one of engineering, technology, and application. This one was intended so that it would fit with the other 3. So this you will see infused throughout the physical, life, and earth and space. It does not need to be taught as a separate course. Instead, you will find standards that have an asterisk next to them in our Iowa Science Standards and Next Generation Science Standards. That asterisk lets you know that they focus on an engineering idea. There are 7 conceptual shifts as we transition from our Iowa core to our Iowa Science Standards. Some of these are more difficult, maybe, for us to accept than others. The first one, science education, should reflect the interconnected nature of science as is practiced in the real world. What that means is that we will have no longer a focus on the scientific method. For me personally, that was a hard one. As I taught, I loved teaching the scientific method. It was very organized. It was very orderly. I would ask the students to essentially memorize the scientific method in order. However, that's not the way science is conducted in the real world. Instead, we need to turn our focus to those 8 practices with the emphasis that they are done in no particular order. There are times in science where we may go no further than a hypothesis and realize that conducting that experiment or that investigation doesn't make financial sense, doesn't make scientific sense, and so we transition away from that hypothesis and find a new one, or do some more background research, and then change our focus of our investigation. So we don't necessarily follow a scientific method step by step, as we perhaps have been teaching students for a long time. So we want to focus on how is science practiced in the real world. The second conceptual shift is that the standards are performance expectations. They are not curriculum. The standards, our performance expectations, are endpoints. What will your student be able to know, and what will your student be able to do because of your curriculum? So you will still be the ultimate deciding factor in how you are going to teach, what program you might be utilizing, what resources you will be using. And you want to choose that so your students would be able to complete those performance expectations. Again, that is an endpoint, what they will be able to know and do because of what you taught them. Conceptual shift number 3 discusses that science concepts will build coherently from K through 12, and they will utilize spiraling. So gone are the days of the one and done, where we cover that in 3rd grade and we won't touch it again until maybe you reach high school. Instead, there will be spiraling. So you will be building on concepts that students learned in previous years. This can allow some marvelous opportunity for collaboration. Perhaps you will notice that your 5th grade class might be covering the same disciplinary core idea as what the 1st grade class is covering. Obviously, to a much deeper depth of knowledge, in a little bit more of a complex fashion, but that basic core idea is still there. This could allow your 5th graders to collaborate with your 1st graders on some type of cooperative project if you so chose. Conceptual shift number 4, the standards focus on deeper understanding as well as application. The focus will be on depth over breadth. The focus will go away from rote memorization. So while it might have been convenient for us to have asked our students to memorize symbols on the periodic table, instead we want students to be able to focus more on applying the use of the periodic table. And certainly, if they use the periodic table enough, they may end up memorizing that the symbol for potassium is K. However, we want to take time, or we want to take a step away from using time to ask the students to do those forms of rote memorization, where they're maybe utilizing flashcards simply to be able to answer the test question, what's the symbol for potassium? Again, we want to focus on application of knowledge, not just rote memorization of facts. Conceptual shift number 5, science and engineering are integrated in the standards all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. So the students will be practicing and experimenting with engineering design. So to be able to create prototypes, perhaps discuss how they would modify those prototypes in the effort to solve some type of problem. Conceptual shift number 6, the standards are designed to prepare students for college, career, and citizenship. We are using the phrase that all standards are for all students. This will have an implication up at the high school level, where if you've had a elective course in earth science but not everybody takes, those performance expectations really would not be met by all of your students. And we'll discuss that a little bit further in this PowerPoint. And conceptual shift number 7, the standards and Common Core state standards in ELA and math are aligned. So when you look at the next generation science standards, it even provides for you the connection between that performance expectation and state standards or Common Core standards in math and English language arts. Conceptual shift number 1, if you remember, was telling us that really the scientific method as it has been taught, as I used to teach it, really is not the real world of science. Instead, we want students to focus on science practices. And this video outlines that science itself is a process. It is not just a content. So as we think about that conceptual shift, we want to be focusing our students on those science practices in place of the scientific method. Again, taking it away from that linear step-by-step process to understanding there are steps, but they are done separately, not always in order, and we call those now the practices. As we move into the presentation section where we discuss Iowa in general, we want to focus on these performance expectations. These from the Next Generation Science Standards are going to be Iowa's new science standards. So each disciplinary core idea, we love our acronym, so that's a DCI, has a performance expectation attached to it. And those performance expectations were adopted as Iowa's new science standards. Again, we want to emphasize that these performance expectations are not curriculum. They are what students are able to do as a result of the curriculum. So these are the endpoints of what students will be able to do and what students will be able to know as a result of your teaching. To read the Next Generation Science Standards takes a little bit of practice. The first time that you look at those performance expectations, it's a little bit daunting. And so we do have a very quick video clip on how to read those science standards. I do want to point out with that video, the numbering system has changed slightly from the time that it was made. You'll notice that they were utilizing the letters A, B, and C to identify some of the performance expectations. That was in draft form. Those have since been changed so that they are a number. Instead of A, it will be a 1. Instead of B, it will be a 2. But the overall outline, the overall way it is laid out has not changed. Here I have just a section that is the performance expectation. If you remember what I said, the performance expectation was adopted as Iowa's new science standard. So this section is the performance expectation. If you're looking at a page from either the Next Generation website or NSTA's website, you will notice there are the connection boxes and the foundation boxes below this. That is additional information to help you make sense of the performance expectation. So here we have the performance expectation. We're looking at a middle school level in weather and climate. I know that this one is from the Earth and Space Sciences. This happens to be from 2-5, which states collect data to provide evidence for how the motions and complex interactions of air masses results in changes in weather conditions. It goes on to help clarify for me and provide that assessment boundary. So these are the performance expectations of Next Generation Science Standards, which have been adopted as Iowa's new science standard. I know that some people have said, well, if we just adopted the performance expectation, we really don't need everything else on the page. However, as you become more familiar with it, you will realize that the additional information on each page with those performance expectations supports and clarifies what is up here. You would not want to look at just the performance expectations on their own. You will want to look at those connections boxes at the bottom and the foundation boxes that will be in the middle of the page. Iowa did choose to modify the NGSS slightly. Instead of adopting the entire document, which grade bands grades 6 through 8, Iowa changed that, and we assigned middle level standards to a specific grade level. And what Iowa selected were standards that are integrated in fashion. So in 6th grade, you will have life and earth and physical science standards all in that grade level. The same is true at 7th grade and 8th grade. So schools that have a domain-specific 7th, 8th, or even 6th grade course will need to transition away from that model. So let's say, for example, a district teaches 7th grade life science and 8th grade earth science. They will need to transition away so that 7th grade will incorporate life and earth and physical, and the same is true at 8th grade. The implementation time frame, the year 2015-16, so the year that we are currently in as I am making this recording, this year is about exploration, awareness, statewide capacity building, understanding these new standards, and understanding the changes that will be coming with them. The 16-17 school year is about beginning those transitions, looking at the conceptual shifts, identifying and using the practices, bringing that language to the students so they become familiar with it. 17 and 18 is about leveraging materials, resources, expertise. Now that your classroom has begun to transition, you'll have a better understanding of what materials you might need. I know a lot of districts are in the position where they might want to adopt materials before the time frame really suggests it. However, if you don't have a firm understanding of what the Next Generation Science Standards are like, what they look like, what they sound like in a classroom, it can make purchasing materials difficult. So we do want to make sure that teachers have that expertise necessary and that knowledge necessary prior to leveraging materials. I know the temptation is there to purchase some sort of curricular program to assist you. However, we are finding that some programs still need some adjustments by the classroom teacher to make them truly aligned. So pushing that leveraging of materials off until the 2017-18 school year will best serve both the classroom teacher, the school, and the students. And also by giving companies that time, they'll be able to develop even better programs than what are currently in existence. 2018-19 is when full implementation is expected, with one exception. Because of the middle school change that Iowa is going to an integrated approach, so understanding that some schools will be changing what that middle school program looks like, middle school will have an additional 2 years. So between grades 6, 7, and 8, one of them will need to be fully implemented in 2018 and 19. Then the following year, 2019, 2020, they will need to add an additional grade. And then the following year, we'll add that 3rd grade. You don't have to go that route. You can implement all 3 grade levels at one time if you so choose, but do know that you have that option to extend your middle school implementation by 2 years, as long as you're adding 1 grade level in each of those years. Some of the important considerations for districts as they look at transitioning. The alignment at 6th through 8th grade will need to phase out any domain-specific courses, as we mentioned. So example, 7th grade life science, 8th grade earth science, those will transition away into the integrated approach. At the high school level, because we are looking at all standards for all students, Elective courses will no longer meet that requirement. So if you have an earth science course and you have those earth science performance expectations in there, because it is an elective course, that will not meet the requirements. Schools will have to make decisions on what best is their plan. They may need to consider changing graduation requirements or required courses. There's a lot to consider for high schools, what the teachers are endorsed in, what they perhaps are comfortable in teaching. And so those conversations would be best had early so that when we are ready for full implementation, there are no surprises. And then at the elementary classroom, teachers will need to look at ways to infuse science into their curriculum. I know a lot of districts, because of lack of time, science has perhaps been regulated to maybe one day a week. Maybe it's even at the end of the day, and frequently teachers aren't able to actually get to that science time because the rest of the day, things have filled up for them, and they needed that time at the end. So elementary teachers will want to look closely at how can they infuse science into their curriculum? What might their daily schedule look like in bringing science into their programs? The state of Iowa has also developed a state implementation plan. That plan can be viewed here. It is lengthy, but it does discuss the history of the implementation plan. I believe this is a total of 16 pages. So when you open the PowerPoint, feel free to go ahead and click on that link so that you can have time to read through. But this state implementation plan does give a year-by-year bulleted list, really, of what the students will be doing, what the teachers will be doing, what the instructors, the instructional coaches or administrators will be doing, and what should be going on behind the scenes. So while these are things we might see in the classroom, what all needed to occur in order for this to happen? Again, filled with wonderful resources and live links that you can utilize those in your transition. AEA 267 has also taken that information and made a working document. That is available here. You will want to make a copy for yourself because you will not have editing rights on this version. So when you get here, you can simply go to File and choose Make a Copy, and then make a copy that you and your district will be able to utilize. If you notice across the bottom are the 4-year tabs. So if we click on year 1, this gives me that same information that was in the state plan. However, we've put it more into a checklist form so teachers can really kind of analyze where they are at. So they can think about, do we have it? Are we there? Are we getting there? Or have we not started yet? There's also areas where you can put your comments in as to why you selected the things that you've selected, and that you can determine what might be your priority areas. You may want to select, first quarter, we're going to focus on these 2 things. Second quarter, this will be our focus. You can make a plan. How are we going to get there? And you may want to consider utilizing those behind the scene bullet points from the state plan, which we've put over here, to help you determine how you will get there. Once you've completed year 1, the tabs are there and ready for year 2 and 3 and year 4. So this truly can be a working, living document. Just because you put some check marks in it doesn't mean you'll never revisit it again. So we are willing and happy to help walk any districts through this. Feel free to contact Kay or myself. Otherwise, this resource is yours, and you are welcome to utilize it. There are other resources for teachers available. The Iowa Core site, of course, which is where we've gone to for most of our years. You might find that this is helpful in determining what are your 6th through 8th standards, because remember, Iowa selected specific ones, but there is not much additional supporting information here as of yet. Other options are the Next Gen Science website. And then AEA 267 has developed 3 booklets: K-5 Science Standards, 6-8 Science Standards, and 9-12. The K-5 and the 6-8 are set up so that they are in topic arrangement, meaning that they are aligned more closely to a unit or a theme, whereas in the 9-12 is aligned by the disciplinary core idea. So all the life sciences will be together. All the physical sciences will be together. I do want to briefly show you for the 6th through 8th teachers, how we are identifying which standards are for which grade level. So here I'm in the 6th grade standards. Only the yellow highlighted standards are the ones that are at 6th grade. So as you go through this booklet, these two were identified in 6th grade. If I want to know where those are, I would have to go further in the booklet to see, are they identified and highlighted under the 7th grade section, or are they highlighted under the 8th grade section? For districts that are ready, Kay and I also have available for you a science standards by grade level. So teachers who are ready to look at their specific standards or performance expectations in their own grade can come to this website. Again, it's linked in the PowerPoint. The tabs across the bottom will demonstrate what grade level we're talking, or are we in the high school or engineering design. So as I look at this, let's just select 3rd grade. I can look, here's my performance expectation numbers. These are all live links that will take me to the next generation document. And so it will give me those foundation boxes and connection boxes. So this is the performance expectation. Let's go down here. Make a claim about the merit of a design solution that reduces the impact of a weather-related hazard. Because it has an asterisk next to it, I know that this has a natural connection to engineering and technology. This happens to be from the Earth and Space Science performance expectation. It was put in the weather and climate topic arrangement. So again, if I'm thinking of units or themes, this would fall in the weather and climate unit. And then the disciplinary core idea is the Earth and human activity. The identified practice is engaging in an argument from evidence. That is the one that is identified in this. Doesn't mean there won't be others. And the identified cross-cutting concept is cause and effect. You can use this as a checklist of saying, yes, I currently teach this in 3rd grade, or I don't teach it, but I know it might be in 5th grade, or this one isn't taught yet and we would need to have this added in by our 2018-19. Here are our connections to our English language arts standards and our connections to our math standards. So again, let's take a look at this one, and I'm going to go right to that topic arrangement where this one will be. So we were just looking at 3.1. So here's my making a claim. So my practice is engaging in the argument. Here's my cause and effect, disciplinary core idea. And here's my this is my disciplinary core idea of natural hazards. So this was my cross-cutting concept, my disciplinary core idea, and my practice. And in this weather and climate unit, Next Generation felt that these two other standards would fit well with that. At this point, we have concluded the PowerPoint. Again, you are welcome to contact Kay Schmallen or myself. You are welcome to revisit that PowerPoint at any time. It was not intended to replace any type of AEA workshops or time or PD. Instead, this is intended to supplement or maybe prepare you if you've heard it once and you wanted to hear it again prior to starting any type of class or workshop. So I thank you for your time. Feel free to revisit this as often as you like, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.